He thought telling her to leave the ring would get him cheers, but in less than a minute, it would cost him something far more valuable than pride. The arena pulsed with energy under bright white lights, the kind that made every movement sharper, every mistake impossible to hide, and in the center stood Jason Brooks, undefeated in this local circuit, 6'2", 215 pounds. Built like a highlight reel and used to the sound of his own name echoing through the crowd, people came to watch him dominate, to watch him prove, again and again, that strength meant control, that confidence meant authority, and tonight was supposed to be no different, until something interrupted the rhythm of the show. She stepped into the edge of the ring like she didn't realize she wasn't part of it, gray hoodie, worn sneakers, her presence so quiet it almost felt accidental, and at first, no one paid attention. Not even the announcer who kept talking over the speakers, not even the camera operators. Scanning for reactions, but Jason noticed, and when he did, he smiled, the kind of smile that wasn't friendly, the kind that came from knowing he held all the power in that moment. "Hey," he called out, loud enough for the nearest rows to hear, "you're in the wrong place," and a few heads turned, then a few more, until the entire section of the audience followed his gaze and saw her standing there, still, hands at her sides, saying nothing. The laughter started small, scattered, then grew as Jason took a step closer, his voice carrying now, feeding off the attention. "This isn't open gym night," he added, tilting his head like he was being generous, like he was doing her a favor by pointing it out, and someone in the crowd shouted, "Let her try," which only made the laughter louder, more confident, because now it wasn't just him, it was everyone. The energy shifted from competition to entertainment. And she had become the joke. Jason glanced back at the crowd, soaking it in, then turned to her again, lowering his voice just enough to make it feel personal. "You don't want to embarrass yourself," he said, and for a moment, it looked like she might actually leave, like she might step back into the shadows where everyone assumed she belonged, but she didn't. Instead, she lifted her head slowly, her eyes steady, not angry, not defensive, just calm in a way that didn't match the noise around her, and that was the first thing that felt off, the first crack in a moment that seemed so controlled. Near the edge of the mat, an older coach who had been clapping along with everyone else stopped, his hands lowering as he watched her stance. The way her weight settled evenly, the way she didn't fidget or hesitate, and his expression changed, subtle but unmistakable, like he'd just recognized something he couldn't quite explain. Jason didn't notice, or maybe he didn't care, because he was already stepping closer again, already playing to the crowd, giving a light, dismissive gesture toward the exit. "Go on," he said, louder now, "before this gets awkward," and the laughter came again, louder than before, filling the space, bouncing off the walls, but in the middle of it, she spoke, and her voice didn't need volume to cut through it. "You sure?" she asked, and just like that, something shifted, not in the crowd, not yet, but in the space between them, a pause so brief most people missed it, except for the coach, whose eyes narrowed slightly, and Jason, who felt it even if he didn't understand it, because for the first time that night, the moment didn't belong entirely to him anymore. The question hung in the air longer than anyone expected, and for a brief moment, the noise of the arena did not disappear, but it lost its edge, like a crowd that suddenly realized it might be watching something different than what they paid for. Jason let out a short laugh, louder than necessary, as if to reclaim control of the moment, and he glanced around to make sure the audience was still with him, still entertained, still on his side, because that was where his confidence lived, not just in his ability, but in the approval surrounding him. "Yeah, I am sure," he replied, spreading his arms slightly as if presenting the obvious, "You do not belong here," and the crowd responded exactly how he expected, a ripple of agreement, a few whistles, someone clapping mockingly from the back rows, but Emily did not move, not forward, not back, and that stillness began to feel heavier the longer it lasted. Up close, Jason could see that she was not tense the way people usually were in situations like this. There was no nervous shifting, no forced smile, no attempt to explain herself, just a quiet focus that did not match the chaos around them, and it unsettled him in a way he could not quite name. So he did what he always did when something felt off, he doubled down. "Look," he said, lowering his voice slightly, leaning in just enough to make it feel like a warning instead of a joke, "This is not for beginners. People train for years to be here," and for the first time, Emily's expression changed, not into anger, not into embarrassment, but into something closer to understanding, as if she had heard those words before, many times, in many different places. She glanced briefly at the mat beneath their feet, then back up at him, and when she spoke again, her tone was calm. Almost conversational. "People train for different reasons," she said, and the simplicity of the sentence made it land harder than anything louder could have. Jason frowned slightly, the script of the moment no longer unfolding the way he had planned, and behind him, the announcer hesitated, unsure whether to continue or let the scene play out, because now more eyes were locked on the ring than before, phones raised higher, conversations fading into a low hum of anticipation. At the edge of the mat, the older coach took a slow step closer, his attention fixed on Emily's posture, the alignment of her shoulders, the way her hands rested naturally at her sides, not clenched, not defensive, just ready in a way that did not need to be announced, and under his breath, almost to himself, he murmured, "That is not beginner stance," but no one near him heard clearly, and even if they had, they would not have understood what it meant. Jason exhaled through his nose, a small sign of irritation breaking through his composure, and he straightened up, deciding to end it quickly, to turn it back into a moment the crowd could laugh at, something simple, something predictable. "All right," he said. Stepping back half a pace, gesturing casually toward the center, "You want to stand there, go ahead, but do not say I did not warn you," and the crowd reacted again, louder this time, sensing something was about to happen, but still expecting the same outcome they had always seen. Emily took a single step forward, just enough to meet him fully in the space he had claimed, and for a fraction of a second, the lights above seemed harsher, the air tighter, and the rhythm of the room shifted into something quieter, something sharper, and in that silence between breaths, before anything else could unfold, one truth began to surface, slow and undeniable, that this was no longer a performance controlled by the loudest voice in the room. For a moment, nothing happened, and that nothing was louder than anything that had come before it, because the crowd was waiting, not for silence, but for the familiar rhythm to return, for Jason to take control again and turn this into the kind of moment they understood, but it did not come, and the longer that pause stretched, the more uncertain the energy became. Jason shifted his weight, subtle at first, but enough to betray that something about her presence was not aligning with what he expected, and he masked it quickly with a smirk, rolling his shoulders like he was preparing for something routine, something easy. "Do not overthink it," he said, loud enough for the front rows, "just watch and learn," and a few people laughed again, though it sounded thinner this time, less confident, as if even they were not sure why. Emily stood across from him, her breathing steady, her gaze level, and there was no urgency in her movements, no rush to prove anything, which only made the moment feel more controlled, but not by him. The overhead lights reflected faintly in her eyes as she adjusted her stance by a fraction, a small shift that most people would have missed, but the coach at the edge did not, his expression tightening further, his attention locked in now, completely still, as if he were watching something he had not seen in years. Jason stepped forward with intention, not reckless, not careless, but certain, the way someone moves when they have never been seriously challenged in this space, and for a split second, the crowd leaned in collectively, expecting the moment to resolve the way it always did, expecting her to falter, to step back, to confirm everything they had assumed about her the second she walked in. But she did not step back. Instead, she moved just enough to let his approach pass without resistance, a subtle redirection that looked almost effortless. And that was when the first real shift happened, not in the ring, but in the crowd, because the reaction was not immediate laughter this time, it was hesitation, confusion, a ripple of whispers instead of cheers. Jason paused, just for a fraction of a second, recalibrating, his confidence still there but now carrying a thin layer of irritation, because the moment had not ended the way it was supposed to, and that was unfamiliar territory for him. He circled slightly, eyes narrowing, studying her more closely now, not as a joke, not as a distraction, but as something he needed to understand. And Emily remained exactly where she was, centered, composed, her presence unchanged, as if the noise around them no longer existed. The announcer's voice faded into the background, unsure whether to interrupt or let the scene unfold, and the phones in the crowd stayed raised, but no one was laughing anymore. Near the edge, the coach took another step forward, his voice low but urgent now as he spoke to someone beside him. "Watch her feet," he said. Though the person next to him only shrugged, not yet seeing what he saw, Jason exhaled slowly, resetting, trying to bring the moment back under his control, but something had already shifted beyond that, something quiet and irreversible, and for the first time that night, the crowd was not watching him to be entertained, they were watching her to understand, and in that growing silence, one realization began to take hold, spreading from the edges inward, that whatever they thought this moment was going to be, they had gotten it completely wrong. Jason felt it before he understood it, that subtle shift in the air when control begins to slip, not dramatically, not all at once, but in small, undeniable pieces, and he did not like it. He straightened his posture, forcing confidence back into his expression, reminding himself of who he was in this room, the name they had come to see, the reason the lights were on and the crowd had gathered, and for a moment, he convinced himself that nothing had changed, that this was still his stage, his moment, his outcome to decide. "You got lucky," he said, his voice sharper now, less playful, more deliberate, and the words hung there, not quite landing the way they were meant to, because no one responded this time, no laughter, no cheering, just a quiet tension that seemed to press in from all sides. Emily did not answer him, did not react to the comment at all, and that absence of reaction carried more weight than any comeback could have, because it left him with nothing to push against, nothing to dominate, nothing to control. She simply adjusted her stance again. A small movement, precise, measured, as if aligning herself with something internal rather than responding to anything external, and the coach at the edge of the mat exhaled slowly, almost in disbelief, his eyes fixed now, fully certain of what he was seeing, though he still had not said it out loud. Jason stepped in again, this time more cautious, his movements tighter, more controlled, no longer performing for the crowd but testing something he could not yet define, and as he moved, Emily shifted just enough to meet him without resistance, her timing exact, her positioning effortless, and the effect was immediate, not dramatic, not explosive, but undeniable, because once again, the moment did not go where he intended it to. The crowd felt it too, that growing realization that what they were watching was no longer predictable, that the script they had expected was no longer being followed, and the energy changed again, quieter now, more focused. The kind of silence that only comes when people are trying to understand something in real time. Jason pulled back slightly, his jaw tightening, and for the first time, there was something behind his expression that had not been there before, not fear, not yet, but uncertainty, and that uncertainty made him hesitate, just enough for the imbalance to become visible. Emily remained steady, her breathing unchanged, her gaze unwavering, and in that stillness, she seemed to occupy more space than before, not physically, but in presence, as if the entire ring had adjusted around her without anyone noticing when it happened. Near the edge, the coach finally spoke louder, unable to keep it to himself any longer. "That is Carter," he said. And the name moved through the small group around him like a quiet ripple, unfamiliar to most, but heavy with recognition to the few who understood it, and one of them turned, eyes widening slightly, as if connecting something long forgotten. Jason did not hear it, or if he did not process it, because his focus was locked on the person in front of him, trying to reconcile what he thought he knew with what was actually happening, and that gap was growing wider by the second. He took another step forward, slower this time, more deliberate, and the crowd leaned in again, not with excitement, but with anticipation, waiting to see what would happen next, waiting to see if the moment would finally resolve or continue slipping further out of his control. And in that narrowing space between them, one truth was becoming impossible to ignore, that the person he had dismissed just moments ago was no longer part of the background, and whatever happened next would not belong to him anymore. The space between them tightened, not physically, but in a way that made every movement feel amplified, every breath noticeable, and for the first time that night, Jason was not thinking about the crowd, not thinking about the cameras or the noise or the reputation he had built step by step over years. He was thinking about her, trying to understand why nothing about this felt easy anymore. He moved again, slower now, more deliberate, testing rather than performing, and Emily met that movement with the same quiet precision she had shown from the start, not reacting, not resisting, just guiding the moment into a place he did not expect, and it happened so smoothly that it took a second for anyone to realize what had just occurred. There was no dramatic motion, no exaggerated display, just a controlled redirection that left Jason stepping back, forced to reset his footing in a way he had not planned, and that was enough, because the crowd saw it, felt it, and the silence deepened. Someone near the front lowered their phone slightly, as if unsure whether they were still watching entertainment or something more real, something they did not yet have a name for. Jason exhaled sharply, trying to shake off the unfamiliar sensation, and he straightened again, but this time the confidence did not return the same way. It came back thinner, more fragile, layered over something else he could not ignore. Emily remained exactly where she needed to be, centered, balanced, her presence calm and unchanging, and that consistency became the contrast that defined the moment, because everything around her was shifting except her. The coach at the edge stepped closer to the ropes now, his voice low but urgent as he spoke again, not to anyone in particular, but to the realization forming in his own mind: she is not reacting, she is reading him. And this time, someone beside him heard it clearly, turning with a confused expression that slowly shifted into something else, something closer to understanding. Jason circled again, but the distance between them no longer felt like his to control, it felt measured, intentional, as if every inch had already been accounted for, and that awareness pressed on him, subtle but constant, until he made another move, quicker this time, trying to break the rhythm, to force the moment back into something familiar. But once again, Emily adjusted just enough, a minimal shift, precise and efficient, and the result was immediate, not loud, not dramatic, but undeniable, because it left him off balance in a way that could not be ignored. A ripple moved through the crowd, not laughter, not cheering, but recognition, the kind that spreads quietly when people begin to realize they are witnessing something they did not expect. Jason paused, longer this time, his eyes narrowing as he looked at her, really looked at her, not as a distraction, not as a joke, but as a problem he needed to solve, and that pause said more than anything he could have spoken. Emily met his gaze without changing expression, her voice soft when she finally spoke, but clear enough to carry. "You are trying to win the moment," she said, "but you are not watching it," and the words settled into the silence like a weight, shifting something deeper than the physical space between them. The coach closed his eyes briefly, almost like confirmation, then opened them again, more certain than ever, and this time he said it louder. "That is Emily Carter," and the name moved further now, reaching ears that recognized it, sparking quiet reactions that spread outward, while Jason stood there, hearing the words without fully understanding them yet, but feeling their impact all the same, because something had already changed, something that could not be reversed. And as the realization began to take shape, one truth settled over the entire room, steady and inescapable, that the moment he thought he controlled had never belonged to him at all. The name did not explode across the room, it spread, slow and quiet, like something people were not sure they should say out loud, and yet once it was spoken, it could not be taken back. Emily Carter, a name that meant nothing to most of the crowd just moments ago, now carried weight in the corners where experience lived, where recognition did not need volume to be understood, and that quiet recognition began to shift everything. Jason heard it this time, clearly, the way it moved from one voice to another, the way it changed the tone of the air, and for a brief second, he hesitated, not because he fully understood, but because something inside him registered that this was no longer just a moment he could brush off. "Who?" someone whispered from the second row, but another voice answered, lower, more certain, "You do not know her," and that question alone was enough to deepen the tension. Jason squared his shoulders again, trying to anchor himself back into what he knew, back into the role he had always played, but the foundation felt different now, less stable, less certain, as if the ground beneath the moment had shifted without warning. He stepped forward again, more carefully this time, his movements measured, no longer for show, no longer exaggerated, and Emily met him in that same quiet way, her focus unchanged, her presence steady, and it was that steadiness that began to define the entire space, because everything else around them was reacting, adjusting, shifting, while she remained exactly where she needed to be. The crowd leaned in again, but now it was not curiosity alone. It was attention, real attention, the kind that comes when people realize they may have misunderstood something important. Jason made another attempt to control the pace, to re-establish the rhythm he had lost, but each movement he made seemed to dissolve before it could fully take shape, redirected with minimal effort, answered without resistance, and that was what made it undeniable, not force, not speed, but precision, a level of control that did not need to prove itself loudly. A few people in the crowd began lowering their phones, not because the moment was less important, but because it demanded more than a screen. It demanded focus, understanding, presence. Near the edge, the coach nodded slowly now, no longer questioning what he was seeing, only watching it unfold, and he spoke again, this time not as a guess, but as a statement. "She is not here to win," he said, "she is here because she already knows," and the words settled into the air with a quiet finality. Jason felt it then, fully, not just the shift in the crowd, not just the change in energy, but the realization that he was no longer ahead of the moment, that he was reacting, adjusting, trying to catch up to something he could not yet define, and that realization slowed him, just enough for it to become visible. Emily took a single step forward, not aggressive, not sudden, just intentional, and that step carried more weight than anything that had come before it, because it marked a transition, subtle but absolute, from being invited into the moment to owning it, the arena. Light seemed harsher now, the space quieter, the distance between them no longer measured by confidence, but by awareness, and in that narrowing space, one truth became impossible to ignore, that whatever happened next would not be about proving strength, but revealing it, and the crowd, once loud and certain, now waited in complete silence, because they were no longer watching a performance, they were witnessing a shift they did not yet fully understand. Time seemed to stretch in a way that made every second feel deliberate, as if the entire arena had unknowingly stepped into a slower rhythm, one that no longer followed noise or ego, but something quieter, something far more controlled. Jason stood there, facing her, and for the first time, he was not thinking about how to dominate the moment, he was thinking about how to understand it. Because nothing about her movements matched what he had trained for, nothing followed the patterns he expected, and that uncertainty began to weigh on him in a way he could not shake. Emily did not rush, did not press forward, did not take advantage of the hesitation that had become visible to anyone paying close attention, and that restraint said more than any action could have, because it showed a level of discipline that did not need to prove itself through force. The crowd felt it too, that growing realization that what they were watching was not about winning or losing in the way they understood, but about something deeper, something more precise, and that realization pulled them further into silence, a silence that no one dared to break. Jason adjusted his footing again, slower now, more intentional, trying to reset the balance he had lost, but every adjustment he made seemed to place him exactly where she expected him to be, as if the space itself had been mapped out before he ever stepped into it. He took a breath, deeper this time, and moved forward with renewed focus. Not aggressive, not careless, but searching, and Emily responded with the same measured calm, shifting just enough to meet him without resistance, guiding the interaction rather than reacting to it, and the effect was immediate, subtle but undeniable, because it left him once again needing to recalibrate, needing to rethink, needing to catch up. Near the edge, the coach leaned closer to the ropes, his voice low but steady as he spoke again, not to explain, but to confirm what he already knew. "She is setting the pace," he said, and this time, the person beside him nodded slowly, beginning to see it as well. Jason heard none of it, but he felt it, the shift in control, the way the moment no longer responded to his intentions, and that realization tightened his focus even further, pushing him to move again, quicker this time, trying to break through the pattern, to disrupt whatever structure had formed around him. But once again, Emily adjusted. With minimal movement, her timing exact, her positioning effortless, and the result was the same, not dramatic, not loud, but decisive in its quiet precision. A collective breath moved through the crowd, not a cheer, not a gasp, but something in between, the sound of people recognizing that they were witnessing something they did not fully understand yet could not look away from. Jason paused again, longer this time, his expression no longer confident in the way it had been at the start, but focused, searching, and just beneath that, something else beginning to surface, something that had not been there before, the awareness that he was no longer controlling the outcome, that he was part of something he had not chosen. Emily met his gaze once more, her voice calm when she finally spoke. "You are trying to force it," she said, "but you cannot control what you do not see," and the words settled into the silence with a quiet weight, shifting something deeper than movement, deeper than position. The lights above hummed faintly, the air felt tighter, and the distance between them seemed smaller now, not because they had moved closer, but because the moment itself had narrowed, focusing everything into a single point of understanding. And in that stillness, just before the next move could unfold, one truth became clear to everyone watching, whether they realized it or not. that this was no longer a test of strength, but a revelation of mastery, and it was only just beginning to show. The silence no longer felt like a pause, it felt like a decision, as if the entire room had unknowingly agreed to stop judging and start watching, and that shift changed everything. Jason could feel it pressing in from all sides, not loud, not obvious, but constant, like the absence of something he had always relied on, the crowd's certainty, the easy laughter, the predictable outcome, and without it, his movements carried a weight they had never carried before. He inhaled slowly, steadying himself, trying to return to what he knew, to the rhythm that had always worked, but the rhythm was gone, replaced by something quieter, something that demanded awareness instead of force. He moved again. Controlled, careful, his focus narrowing completely on Emily, and for the first time, there was no performance left in him, only intent, only the need to understand what stood in front of him. Emily did not mirror his urgency, she did not accelerate or retreat, she simply remained present, her posture aligned, her balance exact, as if she were anchored to something deeper than the moment itself. And when he closed the distance again, she responded with the same minimal precision, guiding rather then reacting, allowing his movement to pass without collision, without resistance, and that was what made it undeniable, because nothing about it looked dramatic, yet everything about it changed the outcome. A quiet murmur moved through the crowd, not confusion now, but realization, the kind that builds slowly as people begin to see patterns where they once saw randomness. Jason stepped back again, more noticeably this time, resetting not just his footing but his understanding, and the hesitation was no longer hidden, it was visible, present in the way he measured the space between them, in the way he no longer rushed to fill it. Near the ropes, the coach exhaled with a faint shake of his head, not in disbelief anymore, but in recognition, and he spoke softly, though the words carried to those close enough to hear, "She is already ahead of him," and this time, no one questioned it. Jason heard the shift even if he did not hear the words, he felt the way the crowd had changed. The way their attention no longer lifted him but weighed on him, and that awareness slowed him further, forcing him to reconsider every step, every angle, every choice. Emily watched him with the same steady gaze, not pressing, not forcing, simply allowing the moment to unfold at the pace she controlled, and in that restraint, there was a clarity that could not be ignored. The overhead lights cast sharp reflections across the mat, the air felt still, and the distance between them seemed to narrow again, not physically, but in understanding, because now both of them knew, even if only one of them accepted it, that this was no longer a contest of presence, it was a test of perception. Jason shifted once more, preparing to move, but this time, there was a fraction of doubt behind the motion, a hesitation that had not existed before, and in that fraction, in that nearly invisible delay, something decisive began to take shape, because moments like this do not announce themselves loudly, they reveal themselves quietly. And as Emily adjusted her stance by the smallest degree, aligning herself with what was about to happen rather than reacting to it, the entire room leaned into that silence. Sensing that whatever came next would not just change the outcome, it would redefine everything they thought they understood about control. The moment hovered on the edge of something irreversible, not loud, not dramatic, but heavy with a kind of clarity that only appears when illusions begin to fall away, and Jason felt it more than he understood it. The quiet pressure of realization building beneath every breath, every step, every decision he was about to make. He shifted his weight again, slower than before, more deliberate, as if trying to calculate a path forward instead of relying on instinct, but the problem was no longer physical, it was perceptual, and that was something he had never trained for. Emily remained exactly where she needed to be, her posture aligned, her balance unshaken, and there was no urgency in her presence, no need to rush toward an outcome, because she was not chasing the moment, she was already inside it. The crowd leaned in further, drawn not by excitement now, but by a deepening sense of anticipation, the kind that settles when people realize they are about to witness something they cannot predict, something they cannot easily explain, and that silence became absolute, stretching across the arena like a held breath no one wanted to release. Jason made his next move, controlled but faster than before, an attempt to reclaim initiative, to disrupt the pattern that had quietly formed around him, but the instant he committed to it, something shifted again, subtle but decisive, because Emily did not react in the way he expected. She did not meet force with force or retreat with hesitation, she adjusted, just enough, redirecting the momentum of the moment with such precision that it felt less like resistance and more like inevitability, and that was when it happened, not as an explosion, not as a spectacle, but as a realization, visible in the way Jason stopped, the way his movement dissolved into stillness, the way his expression changed from focused to uncertain, because for the first time, he understood that he was no longer leading anything, that every step he took had already been accounted for before he even made it. A quiet wave moved through the crowd, not a sound, but a shift in awareness, as if everyone had reached the same conclusion at the same time without needing to say it out loud. Near the ropes, the coach closed his eyes briefly, then opened them again, his voice calm now, almost certain. "It is already decided," he said, and the words carried just far enough to settle into the silence. Jason exhaled slowly, his shoulders lowering slightly, not in defeat, but in recognition, and that recognition changed everything about the way he stood there, because it stripped away the last layer of performance, leaving only the truth of the moment. Emily took a single step forward, measured, quiet, and that step did not demand attention, it commanded it, because it marked the point where understanding became undeniable. The overhead lights hummed softly, the air felt still, and the distance between them no longer represented opposition, but revelation, because in that narrowing space, one truth had fully emerged, clear and inescapable, that what the crowd had mistaken for simplicity was in fact mastery, and as Jason stood there, no longer trying to control the moment but trying to comprehend it, the entire arena seemed to hold its breath, waiting not for impact, but for the meaning of what had already happened to settle into place. The silence settled fully now, no longer uncertain, no longer searching, but complete, as if the entire arena had arrived at the same understanding at the exact same time, and in that stillness, nothing needed to be explained because everything had already been revealed. Jason stood across from Emily, his breathing slower, his posture no longer projecting control but holding awareness, and for the first time that night, he was not trying to move first, he was waiting, not out of strategy, but because something deeper had shifted inside him, something that told him the moment no longer belonged to action, but to recognition. The bright overhead lights cast sharp shadows across the mat, outlining both of them in stark clarity, and yet it was Emily who seemed more defined, not physically, but in presence, as if the space itself had aligned around her without resistance. She did not advance quickly, she did not press the situation further, instead she remained grounded, her weight balanced, her gaze steady, and in that quiet control, there was a finality that did not need to be declared. Jason looked at her differently now, not as an opponent, not as an interruption, but as something he had failed to see from the beginning, and that realization settled across his expression in a way the crowd could read without a single word being spoken. Near the edge of the ring, the coach folded his arms slowly, his posture relaxed now, because there was nothing left to question, and he spoke quietly, almost as if finishing a thought that had been building from the start. "She never needed to prove it," he said, and this time, the words carried further, reaching ears that no longer resisted their meaning. A few people in the crowd nodded subtly, others lowered their phones completely, not because the moment had ended, but because it had reached something deeper than spectacle, something that required presence rather than recording. Jason took a small step back, not forced, not sudden, but intentional, and that step was more telling than anything that had come before it, because it acknowledged what the entire room had already understood, that control had shifted long before anyone realized it, and that the outcome had been decided in ways that had nothing to do with strength or noise. Emily watched him for a moment longer, her expression unchanged, her breathing steady, and then she gave the slightest nod, not as a victory, not as a statement, but as a quiet acknowledgement that the moment had reached its conclusion. The arena remained silent, no applause, no reaction, just a shared understanding settling into place, and as Emily turned, pulling her hood back up with the same calm simplicity she had entered with, she stepped away from the center of the ring without hesitation, without looking back, leaving behind a space that felt different now, altered in a way no one could quite describe. Jason remained where he was, his eyes following her as she walked toward the edge. And in that stillness, something changed within him as well, not visible, not immediate, but real, because for the first time, he had encountered something he could not overpower, something he could not predict, something that required more than confidence to understand. The lights continued to hum above, the air slowly shifting as the moment began to release its hold on the room, and yet no one spoke, because some moments do not end with noise, they end with clarity. And as Emily disappeared beyond the ropes, leaving the crowd in complete silence, one question remained, quiet but persistent, echoing through every mind present, not about what they had just seen, but about how many times before they had mistaken quiet for weakness without ever realizing what it truly was. The silence did not break when she stepped off the ring, it followed her, stretching across the space like a shadow that refused to lift, and for a few seconds, no one moved, no one spoke, as if the entire room was still catching up to what had just happened. Jason remained exactly where he was, his posture unchanged, but the meaning behind it completely different, because the energy that once surrounded him had shifted, no longer lifting him, no longer defining him, but leaving him alone with something far more unfamiliar, understanding. He looked down briefly at the mat beneath his feet, then back toward the edge where Emily had disappeared, and there was no anger in his expression, no frustration, only a quiet processing, as if he were replaying every moment in his mind, trying to find the point where it had all changed, not realizing that it had never been his to control in the first place. Around him, the crowd began to stir again, but slowly, cautiously, like people returning from somewhere deeper than entertainment, and the usual noise did not come back right away. Instead there were whispers, small conversations forming between strangers, voices lowered, questions asked without certainty. "Did you see that?" someone murmured, while another replied, "She barely moved," and a third voice added, "That was not luck," and the word spread, not as excitement, but as realization. Near the ropes, the coach leaned back slightly, his arms still folded, his gaze steady, and someone beside him finally asked the question that had been forming since the name was spoken, "Who is she?" And the coach took a breath before answering, not loudly, not dramatically, just clearly, "National level, years ago," stepped away before most people even heard of her, and the simplicity of the explanation made it land harder, because it meant that what they had just witnessed was not new, not sudden, but something refined long before this moment ever existed. Jason heard pieces of it now, fragments of conversation reaching him as the room slowly came back to life, and each word added another layer to what he was beginning to understand, not just about her, but about himself, about the way he had relied on noise, on attention, on assumption, and how easily those things could disappear when faced with something real. He took another step back, this time not toward the center, but away from it, his shoulders relaxing slightly, not in defeat, but in acceptance, and that acceptance changed the way he stood there, grounding him in a way that had nothing to do with the crowd. The announcer cleared his throat softly, unsure how to continue, the usual script no longer fitting the moment, and even the lights seemed quieter now, their steady hum blending into the background as the arena slowly returned to motion. But something had shifted permanently, something that could not be undone by noise or distraction, because once seen, it could not be unseen, and as people began to move again, to talk, to process, one thing remained clear in the space she had left behind, that what defined the moment was not what she did, but what she did not need to do. And as Jason finally turned away from the center of the ring, his gaze no longer searching for approval but reflecting something deeper, the room carried forward a quiet understanding, that real mastery does not demand attention, it reveals itself when attention is no longer enough. The noise returned slowly, but it was not the same noise that had filled the arena before. It carried a different weight now, quieter, more thoughtful, as if every voice was measuring its words instead of throwing them freely into the air. People began to sit back down, some shaking their heads, others staring at the ring as if expecting something else to happen, something to restore the familiar rhythm they had come for, but nothing came, and that absence became part of the lesson they did not yet realize they had received. Jason moved toward the corner of the ring, his step steady but no longer commanding attention, and for the first time that night, no one followed him with their eyes the way they had before, because the center of the moment had already shifted elsewhere, beyond the ropes, beyond the spotlight. He reached the edge and rested his hands briefly on the top rope, looking out at the crowd. But what he saw now was not admiration or expectation, it was reflection, a room full of people processing something that had quietly challenged everything they assumed about strength, about presence, about what it meant to belong in a place like this. The announcer spoke again, his voice returning with cautious energy, trying to guide the event forward, but even he adjusted his tone, softer, more measured, as if acknowledging that the moment they had just witnessed could not be undone by simply moving Near the side of the arena, the coach stepped away from the ropes, his expression calm, almost satisfied, not because of what had happened, but because of what had been revealed, and someone approached him again, more curious now than confused. "Why did she leave like that?" they asked, and the coach paused before answering, considering the question carefully. "Because she did not come here to stay," he said, "she came here to show." And the simplicity of the response carried further than any explanation could have. Across the room, a few people replayed the moment on their phones, watching closely, slowing it down, trying to find the exact point where everything changed, but the more they watched, the more they realized there was no single moment, no dramatic turning point, only a series of small, precise decisions that had quietly shaped the entire outcome. Jason stepped down from the ring, his feet meeting the floor with a soft sound that seemed louder than it should have been, and as he walked past a group of spectators, he caught pieces of their conversation, not mocking, not dismissive, but thoughtful, respectful, and that shift in tone settled into him in a way that no applause ever had. He did not rush, did not seek out attention, he simply moved through the space with a different awareness, one that had not existed before, because now he understood something he had never needed to understand until this moment, that presence without awareness is fragile. And confidence without understanding can dissolve without warning. The lights continued to shine, the event continued to move, but the meaning of what had happened lingered, carried in quiet glances, in lowered voices, in the way people looked at the ring differently now, not as a stage for dominance, but as a place where something deeper could be revealed. And as the night continued, one realization stayed with everyone who had witnessed it, steady and unspoken, that true mastery does not demand recognition, it leaves behind understanding, and once that understanding takes hold, it changes the way you see everything that comes after. The night moved forward, but something of it stayed behind, not in the lights or the ring or the echo of voices returning to their usual rhythm, but in the quiet shift that lingered in the way people carried themselves as they left, in the way conversations felt more measured, more aware, as if everyone had witnessed something that did not belong entirely to the moment, but to something deeper. Outside the arena, the air was cooler, the noise of the crowd dispersing into smaller fragments. And among them, Emily walked without hurry, her hoodie pulled up, her presence once again blending into the ordinary world as if nothing unusual had happened at all. No one stopped her, no one called out, and that absence of attention felt intentional, almost respectful, because something about the way she had left made it clear she was not someone who stayed for recognition. Inside, Jason stood near the edge of the floor for a moment longer before finally stepping away, his movements slower, not from hesitation, but from thought, the kind that settles after something shifts your understanding in a way you cannot ignore. He glanced once more toward the ring, now occupied again, the announcer doing his best to restore energy, the crowd responding, but not with the same certainty as before, and he knew without needing to say it that something about that space had changed, not visibly, not dramatically, but fundamentally. As he walked through the dispersing audience, he caught fragments of conversation still circling the same moment, still trying to define it, and for once, he did not feel the need to correct, to explain, or to reclaim anything, because there was nothing left to prove, only something to understand. Near the exit, the coach stepped out into the hallway, his pace steady, his expression calm, and when someone asked him one final question, "Do you think she will come back?" he paused just briefly before answering. "People like her do not return for attention," he said. "They appear when the moment requires it," and then he continued walking, leaving the words behind like a quiet conclusion. Outside, Emily reached the far end of the parking lot, the glow of the arena lights fading behind her, and for a brief second, she stopped, not to look back, but to listen, as if acknowledging something unseen, something internal, before continuing forward without hesitation. The night carried on, cars pulling away, voices fading, the world returning to its usual pace, but for those who had been there, something remained, not as a story they would tell loudly, but as a realization they would carry quietly, a shift in how they saw strength.